Hey everyone, you're listening to Fantasy Football Uptick. I'm Jeremiah Blue, and today we're going to be going over the much anticipated 2020 rookie receiving class. I'm going to be breaking them up into 5 tiers. We're going to be going over the top 10. With that, let's jump right in. Okay, so this is going to be a dynasty ranking. This is not just going to focus on this year, but all years moving forward, although I put a little bit more concern into year one because I'm always trying to win my season this year, right? And if they have a bad year one, then typically they lose value. So now you can't trade them away, or you can go out and trade for them if we're expecting that. So like a guy like T. Higgins, which we'll get to later, I expect to have a bad year one because he's buried on a depth chart. Therefore, next season, I believe he'll be easier to acquire than he would be to acquire this season. So let's start with tier one. So tier one, I got a guy by himself, is Ceedee Lamb. Obviously, I'm a Cowboys fan, but I'm saying this unbiasedly. When they first came out, I actually thought Juedy and Lamb were in the same tier, but the more research I really did, I really realized that it's really not that way, because you take a look at the quarterback situation right off the bat. One's got Dak, one's got Drew Lock, which I really like Drew Lock, but he's not Dak, especially at this point. And the offense isn't what the Cowboys offense is. And Jeudy is in an offense with just as many targets that he's going to have to go out there and compete with, whereas Dak is on an offense like that. But if we just take what they did last year, the Cowboys threw for 1,500 more yards than the Broncos. So that means 1,500 more yards available to the Dallas Cowboys receivers than there are the Denver Broncos. Now, that being said, I expect the Denver Broncos to be better, and I expect the Cowboys to be worse in the offensive yard perspective, not from an efficiency standpoint, but because they were historic last year. They were the best. They were the third best offense from a yards perspective, so going back to 2004. So you can't expect a repeat of that every single year. Now, that being said, they did lose Jason Witten. They lost Randall Cobb, and that equates to 166 targets and 118 receptions that are available for grabs for Ceedee Lamb. Plus, I think he eats into both Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup's production. That's not taken into account that if either one of those guys gets hurt, he comes in and immediately is the number 1 or 2. And then we're talking dynasty-wise, Cooper and Gallup have very tradable contracts. I'm not saying they will be traded, because the Cowboys do like to run a lot of 11 personnel, which is a 3-receiver set, 67% of the time. And Mike McCarthy in 2018, the last time he was a head coach, actually ran 11 personnel 77% of the time. Mike McCarthy has historically not relied on his tight ends so much. He does have an offense that can support 3 receivers, and the Cowboys have the offensive line, the running game. I just think that Ceedee Lamb's going to have a lot of room to run. I think he'll be good year one, right out of the gate. He'll at least be startable, and he has potential to one day eventually get to that, wide receiver 1 category where we're drafting him in the first round from a wide receiver perspective. Obviously, depending on what your draft strategy is, a lot of running backs go, but he'll be in that top 10 once it becomes kind of his team. I think he projects to be a better receiver even than Amari Cooper at some point, and he will have Dak throughout his entire career. If we go to the next guy on the list, which is Jeudy, again, a lot of the guys on this list don't have that. They don't have a quarterback that's established going to be on their roster, and they don't have a situation where they're going to be heavily involved in the passing game, or their teams are going to be heavily involved passing the football, because a lot of these teams are run-heavy offenses, which we'll get to here in a bit. All the college stats are up there, not the actual stats themselves. I'll tell you, 2017 to 2019, he was really good. I just didn't want to put the stats up there because first of all, receiver stats don't necessarily translate, but there was so many stats that I wanted to put on the Ceedee Lamb slide that I didn't really want to trash up the slide. But he was number 1 in yards per target, number 1 in yards per route run, number 1 in yards after catch per reception. He's a tackle breaking machine. His hands, especially deep down the field, are amazing. He gets compared to DeAndre Hopkins. The one negative that I can say about Ceedee Lamb is the players that they compare him to, like guys like DeAndre Hopkins, who are extremely physical wide receivers. Ceedee Lamb doesn't actually have that size So there's really no one in the history that going back that really projects to be, that plays like Ceedee Lamb and is the size of Ceedee Lamb. The person he reminds me the most of, to be honest with you, a bigger, slower version of Steve Smith. He plays with that attitude. He attacks the ball the way Steve Smith used to attack the ball. His run after the catch is the way of Steve Smith. He's just bigger. He's 6'2". So imagine Steve Smith in a bigger body, obviously a little slower. I think Ceedee Lamb ends up trying to work, and eventually as a receiver, he's going to have to put on a little muscle. Hopefully he can maintain that speed, but either way, I think he projects to be something great in the NFL. The one area he can improve on is his route running, which is the case with all rookie receivers for the most part, and I do believe that's going to happen. So again, his hands are so good, his run after the catch is so good. Even if he doesn't project to be as physical as he was in college, which I do think he can still do that, he can still project to eventually be one of those elite route running great receivers with great hands. And he's probably going to be the number one receiver on the Dallas Cowboys within 3 years. So again, this is going to be a guy that you really want. Plus, we look at the Dallas Cowboys history. They like to focus on offense. They put a back burner on defense, and historically they're just good on offense all the time. So you get a guy in that offense, it's a guy that I want in a dynasty league, whereas the receivers are going to be good, just projecting overall for a long period of time. So then that brings me to tier 2. And again, I got Jeudy as number 1 in tier 2, and he was in that tier 1, but the more I thought about it, Ceedee Lamb just had way more things going for him. Ceedee Lamb was already a better receiver for me when coming out of college, and he landed in a better situation in my opinion. So all that adding up, if I'm drafting, this is the reason I break it up tier 1 and tier 2. If I'm drafting and I can trade up, if I'm going after one of the top 2 receivers, I will trade something so that I can get up to number 1. When I say tier 2, Juedy or Reagor, if I'm 2 picks away and I know I'm going receiver, I'm not necessarily trading up to get Jeudy. I don't care which one of these guys falls to me because they're in the same tier. That's what I mean when I say tiers. That's why there's a little gap between Ceedee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy, and that's why Ceedee Lamb is in a higher tier than Jerry Jeudy. So Jeudy, he's actually got a lot to deal with target-wise. When I first saw this, I thought, okay, he's going to a place that's only got Courtland Sutton, and he's basically going to be the number 2 day 1, which is still the case. But the reason I actually dropped him is not because of the things that I find holes in Judy's game. I love Jeudy just as much as I did the day that he was drafted there. It's that I started doing more research on Noah Fant. Noah Fant's just going to get better. He's involved in that offense. And KJ Hamler was a guy that I already liked, but I just don't see him failing in the NFL. Now, he'll never be that guy that you might want in a PPR fantasy league, I don't believe. But I do believe he projects to be like a Desean Jackson type where he's getting enough targets just to eat into everybody else. From a football standpoint, this is a great fit for the Denver Broncos. Drew Lock is the real winner here because Courtland Sutton is a beast. You're going to have Jeudy running out of the slot, and you're going to have Hamler running from the outside, really stretching the field, creating all this space. And then Noah Fant there and Melvin Gordon in the backfield, who's going to be involved in the passing game. And they're going to lean on the run a little bit because they went out and got a guy like Melvin Gordon. And again, we don't know what Drew Lock's going to be, but all the pieces are in place for this team to be good. If Drew Lock is not great, the problem with this is this offense and defense are so good that Drew Lock is going to end up being right in the middle where they're never going to be drafting high enough to get one of those really good quarterbacks. So you're really banking a lot on Drew Lock. And since this is Dynasty, this could end up being, and again, I don't think Drew Lock is Andy Dalton. I think he's going to project to be better than that. But this could end up being an AJ Green, Andy Dalton, which AJ Green had a great career. But I don't know that Jeudy is AJ Green either. So what I'm saying is AJ Green never reached his full potential because he's never had an elite quarterback. I think that it is way more likely that some of these other guys who already have elite quarterbacks will find it easier to meet their full potential because, like Jalen Reagor, the next guy on this list, Jalen Reagor has Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz can make Reagor eventually get to his full potential. Even though I think Jerry Jeudy's a better receiver than Jalen Reagor, I have them on the same tier because we already know that Carson Wentz is going to be good, and we don't yet know that about Drew Lock. So the positive is obviously he's one of the best route runners that's ever come out of college. So he's already projected to be one of the best route runners for his age that's ever come out of college. The problem is that that's one of those things that you get better at in the NFL. Now, I'm not saying that that's a negative, But the negative is that he ran basically out of the slot the majority of his time in Alabama. And he played with two great receivers. Obviously, Ruggs went in the first round this year, and Smith's going to end up going in the first round of next year's draft. He basically always had a linebacker, a safety guarding him. He never got the press man-to-man coverage that you would see, that you want to see coming out of college. He didn't have success on the outside. And honestly, I think it's easier to have more success in the slot because they're playing back. You're just kind of finding the gaps, especially in zones. All you got to do is find the zones, which is fine. That's great, but he's playing with room already. You naturally have room to start off with working out of the slot. So I don't believe that Jerry Jeudy's going to have a problem transitioning into the NFL. It's just something to look at, that he played majority of his time out of the slot. If they ask him to play on the outside in these two receiver sets, with the Broncos do run, because they just drafted another tight end. So they're going to have two great tight ends, or two very athletic tight ends. So they might be asking him to do this quite a bit, is whether or not he can have that success on the outside, because that's not where he had his success in college. All right, going to Jalen Reagor. Jalen Reagor, if you look at his college stats, it's going to be pretty bad because he had one of the worst quarterbacks in the entire NCAA. So there are some of the stats right there. But Jalen Reagor, while he didn't run well at the combine, he is known to be a burner. And in his pro day, he ran a 4.2 something, which I thought he was going to be faster than what he ran at the combine. So I do buy the pro day just a little bit, but I still don't think it's a 4.2 time. It's probably somewhere in the 4.3 area. And even if it is, the thing is, he's a good route runner. He's a good receiver. He's got great hands. He wasn't playing with a lot of success there. As you can see on that board there, it's 30.7% of Reagor's passes were inaccurate, which was bottom 3 in the NCAA. And only 61.4% of his passes were even deemed as catchable, which is bottom 2 in the NCAA. So again, I think he's better than his tape shows. Everything I watched on tape, and I watch a lot of Big 12 because I'm a Texas Longhorns fan, he was wide open. He was wide open quite a bit. He got behind safeties quite a bit. With a better quarterback, he could have put up monster numbers. If it was him playing with Joe Burrow in LSU and Justin Jefferson playing with his quarterback in TCU, it's a question to how successful Justin Jefferson would have been compared to how successful Jalen Reagor is going to have been. What I do know is that he's in Philly. They got old receivers. He's going to be the man at some point next year if Alshon Jeffrey or Desean Jackson get hurt, which you can pretty much bank on, or the following year when they release Alshon Jeffrey, he's going to be playing as the number 2. So I really have a lot of faith that Jalen Reagor is going to have a fantastic career. I mean, this is probably the biggest can't miss career-wise besides Ceedee Lamb in this draft because of the quarterback that he is playing with and he is basically attached to going forward. Before I move on, you're going to hear a lot of people say that Jalen Reagor is going to come in and immediately be the slot receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles. While that's probably true, just take it into account that they have two of the best tight end combos in the NFL, probably the best pair, and they run a lot of 12 personnel, which is one running back, two tight ends, and two receivers. They got Desean Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, assuming they're both healthy, right? So they ran that personnel package 54% of the time. Now, Jalen Reagor can come in and spell Desean Jackson. He can come in and spell Alshon Jeffrey. I still think Jalen Reagor is going to be on the field quite a bit, but just be aware that this is a team that runs a lot of heavy packages, not necessarily going to have that third receiver on the field. So take Alshon Jeffrey and Desean Jackson into account, who I think will probably be the starters going into the season. Even if Jalen Reagor manages to pass one of them on the depth chart, it's not going to be late into the year, assuming they come into the camp both healthy. Okay, so tier 3. I put Henry Ruggs and Justin Jefferson on this. I think a lot of people are going to say, a lot of people have Justin Jefferson significantly over Henry Ruggs. I honestly don't see it. Justin Jefferson was in the best offense in college football last year. There are some things that I see in Justin Jefferson's game that I don't really know. Similar to Jerry Jeudy, he ran 98.6% of his snaps out of the slot. That doesn't impress me. I like guys that can have success on the outside. The slot is the easy location to have success, especially when you have a fantastic quarterback, right? In 2018, he ran almost exclusively from the outside. You can see his numbers there. Obviously, most people get better, especially out of college. So I'm not saying that Justin Jefferson cannot project to be a great wide receiver in the NFL, but he did have problems with man-to-man as far as press coverage and creating separation. He's got fantastic hands. He never drops the ball, so in that aspect, he can catch contested passes. He's got some of the best hands in this draft. So I'm not dogging Justin Jefferson's hands. The biggest concern when I evaluate receivers is guys that have problems creating separation, especially when you've got a conservative quarterback like Kirk Cousins. The other thing is we talked about how successful he was out of the slot. A lot of people say that he might be the best slot receiver in this draft, which is, in my opinion, obviously Jeudy. But the Vikings do not run a lot of 3 receiver sets. Similar to what I was talking about with Jalen Reagor, the Vikings are like the worst team to go to if your strength is running routes out of the slot. Now, Justin Jefferson is going to be the number 2 receiver there, for sure. There's just no depth in Minnesota at receiver. They lost Stephon Diggs, so that's going to create an opportunity. He's going to be the day 1 number 2 receiver. But again, we talked about how most of his success come out of the slot. If we look at the Minnesota Vikings and what they like to do, last year they ran 2 receiver set or less 80% of the time. So every time they go less, that's going to be Adam Thielen's role. And again, while they run a lot of 2 receiver sets, that's not something he had success with in college. And if we're going to compare him to Stephon Diggs, the comparison is not close. I mean, let me know in the comments if you think that it is. It's not to me. I think Stephon Diggs is a significantly better receiver than Justin Jefferson. And just to get to Stephon Diggs' numbers is going to be the ceiling for Justin Jefferson, where I didn't even like owning Stephon Diggs last year because this was such a run-heavy offense. Last year, just 2019, was the 3rd fewest passing attempts in the league. So I think there is a lot of opportunity here to be a starter, but it's going to be hard fantasy-wise with Thielen being the guy. I do like Justin Jefferson long-term, but I think most people will have Justin Jefferson higher than I do on my rankings. The other guy I have in tier 3 is Henry Ruggs. So a lot of people are going to look at his stats in college, say, hey, he played with Tua, he played with Jeudy, and if you just look at his stats, Jeudy outperformed him by a lot, right? Well, the truth is, Henry Ruggs played a role in that offense, which was basically to be a distraction, and Jeudy was the one that got the easier coverage because he played out of slot, like we were talking about earlier. So, of course, Jeudy had more success, but Henry Ruggs, and again, I'm more impressed with guys who can have success on the outside. There were so many weapons in Alabama, and they ran the ball so efficiently. Their defense was so good that he was never asked to be that workhorse wide receiver. But one of the stats that I did see about him was open separation. When I say open separation, means more than a step on the person trying to cover him. On 67.7% of the targets when he lined up outside, which led the FBS of all receivers. So this is a guy who can get separation, and if he's asked to be the number 1 receiver, can be that workhorse. And he's got that every single time he touches the ball, he can take it to the house. So with Henry Ruggs, I have him in this tier because, again, I think Justin Jefferson, while he has a high floor, he has a low ceiling. And while Henry Ruggs, I just feel like his ceiling is through the roof. Now, his floor is definitely lower than Justin Jefferson because, first of all, he plays with Derek Carr. And there is a history of guys being overly drafted who were not successful in college and just have this crazy speed that never make it in the NFL. I don't think that's Henry Ruggs. I put Henry Ruggs in this tier because I think his ceiling is Tyreek Hill, and I think that his floor is definitely higher than guys like Tavon Austin and Corey Coleman and John Ross even, who went in this area. Now, there's an injury situation, and guys that run these fast just tend to get hurt. That's my biggest fear with Henry Ruggs, is that he will end up getting injured. I actually have very little fear that he will be unsuccessful in the NFL, assuming he stays healthy. Okay, so that brings us to tier 4. Tier 4 is like my high ceiling, extremely low floor tier. Denzel Mims, As you can see there, definitely struggled with drops coming out of college, but he had a great Senior Bowl, and I really like to hear that about players when they have that Senior Bowl, because you're going up against guys that are going to the NFL, right? And he's just a physical monster. You watch him on tape, he is the most physical receiver in this draft, bar none. Like Hopkins, Michael Irvin type, like just extremely physical. He'll lead all rookies in offensive pass interference probably this season, just because that's the way he is. But people make their living on offensive pass interference. I've said this before, but just go look at DeAndre Hopkins' film. He's just extremely physical, and he gets away with it. If we go back to the Kyle Rudolph touchdown for the Minnesota Vikings in the playoffs, refs will swallow the whistle at certain times during games. So again, I just think he's going to have loads of success in the NFL. I know he had some drop issues, but there have been players that come out with drop issues that can get that fixed overall. And if you think that that's something that obviously can't be fixed, that's why he's in tier 4 and not higher. Because if he did not have drop issues, he would have been drafted way higher. Again, most physical receiver in this class, had a great Senior Bowl. He's a better route runner than people give him credit for. And he's just a physical beast, 6'3", and can run a 4.3. Like, there's not receivers like that out there. And he's playing with a young quarterback, and I have so much faith in Sam Darnold. So that is a big reason why he's above all those other guys, because Sam Darnold's going to be the quarterback for the New York Jets for a really long time. They made some fixes to their offensive line this year. I think Le'Veon Bell's primed for a big year. And I think that Denzel Mims is going to benefit from a lot of that, because they're going to start stacking boxes. He's not going to be the guy that defenses are focused on. And I think that he could have a big year one, but I think he's going to get to grow with Sam Darnold throughout his entire career, similar to what I was saying with Jalen Reagor. And I really think that this is a great spot for him. So the next guy on the list is Laviska Shenault. Laviska Shenault is a guy like in 2018 that was in Heisman talks. If he didn't suffer so many injuries and deal with turf toe and other core injury issues, this was a guy that probably would have gone early in the first round. He would have been talked about that, but he projects to be one of those, like, he's a run after the catch machine. So he's going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think I would have liked him a little bit more if he was with a quarterback that I felt comfortable with. A quarterback that he could have grown with, similar to what I'm saying with Denzel Mims. That was kind of the tiebreaker there. But I love Laviska Shenault, and I think he's going to be used a lot as a running back in the NFL. And he could end up having an even better career as a role like David Johnson or a Ty Montgomery, where they're receivers, but they end up transitioning to running backs. But he's better to me than those guys at receiver, so he can play receiver if they don't decide to use him like that, but they can use him. And again, I've been nervous that they're going to replace Leonard Fournette. I think this was the guy they brought in to spell Leonard Fournette in that third down role, and they've already said they're going to use him all over the field. I just think this is a guy that's going to have a lot of success in the NFL, and he's going to project to have a lot of success depending on what your league settings are. But he could be playing, he's going to play a lot of running back, he's going to play a lot of receiver, he's going to get the ball in his hands quite a bit. So if they ever were to go out and get a good receiver, which I project Jacksonville, like, this is a huge projection to be one of the worst teams in football. So I think next year they end up going out and getting a good quarterback to come in and run that team. And then I think at that point, Shenault's value is going to go way up. Brandon Aiyuk, I didn't really like Brandon Aiyuk coming out of college. I didn't hate him either. I just thought he was just kind of a meh receiver that, if landed in a good system, is a good route runner, great after the catch, but not the best at anything in this class. He goes to the 49ers in the first round. I'm not dismissing the draft stock, so he's going to be the number 2 receiver, similar to Justin Jefferson. And he's on an offense that doesn't pass the ball very much, with a quarterback that doesn't take a lot of chances. So I do think that he's going to project to be something good. I have Justin Jefferson slightly above him because I had Justin Jefferson as a better receiver coming out of college. But I think he's in a very similar situation as Justin Jefferson. He's going to walk in, be the day one, number 2 wide receiver, and he's going to be in an offense that you never know how much they're going to pass. They're going to try to run the ball as much as possible. They're going to play good defense. But Brandon Aiyuk has that ability to really break tackles and take the ball to the house. So his upside is just as high as Justin Jefferson's in mine. His floor is slightly lower because I don't think he's as talented as Justin Jefferson. The next is my tier 5, which I have T. Higgins and Michael Pittman on, which I think a lot of people are going to have issues with that because I've seen Michael Pittman and T. Higgins going really high in drafts. But when I look at rookies, there is one thing that almost all the busts that I've seen in the past have issues with coming out of college and transitioning to the NFL, and that's creating the separation. These are two guys that are 6'4", just monsters, and they made their money in college essentially by being bigger and stronger than the guys that were guarding them. And while that's still going to be the case in the NFL, there's not cornerbacks. There's not very many cornerbacks that are 6'4", but the talent level in the NFL is just better. They're not going to be able to just moss everybody. Mossing is basically when you jump over somebody and just rip it out of their hands. Like, they're not going to be able to do that in the NFL. T. Higgins was one of the best deep ball receivers in the NFL last year, except he can't create separation. He doesn't have that elite speed. I don't think that's going to translate into the NFL. We look at some of the busts in the past. Those are the guys that have been bust. Guys that were super elite athletes from a size and speed standpoint in the college game, but couldn't create that separation in the NFL game. And the corners were just so good that they were never able to really explode. Now, I'm not saying that these guys are going to be for sure bust, but if I'm drafting, I'm taking all 8 of the players that I mentioned earlier over these guys because of that. Now, T. Higgins, I have one spot above Michael Pittman because T. Higgins is playing with a better quarterback who he's going to get to grow with. Again, I'm not saying that Joe Burrow is a better quarterback than Phillip Rivers today, but I am saying that Joe Burrow is going to project to be a better quarterback over the next 10 years than Phillip Rivers is going to be over the next 10 years. Phillip Rivers might only last one more year. And the Colts are going to project to be a more run-heavy offense moving forward. I mean, these guys are guys that are probably going to have games where they have 2 touchdowns because these are going to be the touchdown threats, but they're also going to have games where they have 1 catch for 10 yards because that's the kind of guys these guys project to be. Mike Williams types from San Diego, that's a perfect example. While I think they're going to have a role, I think their upside can be capped because of the issue creating separation. With T. Higgins, I look at guys like A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, John Ross. I think he's going to have a hard time finding the field, to be honest with you. And while you might go, well, he's better than John Ross. Well, John Ross plays a role in that offense. John Ross' 4.2 speed is meant to create space for guys like A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd. So while I think T. Higgins is going to see the field, I just don't see where he fits immediately. A.J. Green, they're currently franchising A.J. Green, trying to work an extension out. So I imagine that they value A.J. Green. If they work an extension with A.J. Green, I don't know where T. Higgins eventually even ends up in this offense. Michael Pittman, I think he's the day one number 2. Again, I just don't know what quarterback is going to be their guy moving forward. I think the Colts project to be fairly good this year. So even if it's Phil Rivers for the next 2 years, that offensive line's so good, the running game's so good, the coaching staff is so good. I don't see them drafting an elite quarterback early anytime soon. So again, who's going to be throwing Michael Pittman the ball in 3 years? That's why I have Michael Pittman as low as I do. But both of them they got great hands. They can catch the ball. Contested passes are going to be great red zone options. So I don't project them to be bust or bad players. I just don't see a lot of upside with these guys. So to go back through it, tier 1, Ceedee Lamb by himself. Tier 2, Juedy and Reagor. I really don't care what order you put those in. It depends just on what you kind of need. I think if you need a guy for this season, I would lean towards Juedy. I think if you need a guy for a career, I would lean towards Reagor. And then tier 3, I got Ruggs and Justin Jefferson. I'm probably taking Ruggs in basically all formats, but tier 3, again, I don't mind waiting for Jefferson there. I'm not trading up for Ruggs. I think the difference between those two is very slim. Tier 4, I'm going Mims, then Shenault, and then Aiyuk. And that's because I just think Mims has got the most upside of this group. I think Shenault could end up being a running back before his career is over. And Brandon Aiyuk, he has the capital, the draft capital. They're going to try and get him involved because they took him in the first round. And then tier 5, T. Higgins and Michael Pittman, both guys that I do not hate. Again, I think this is a great year for receivers. I just think that of these guys, they've got the least amount of upside because of what they're going to be used for is essentially just red zone targets. That's it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, like, subscribe. I know not everybody's going to agree with what I got to say, so let me know in the comments. We can have a discussion. Until next time, see ya!